Hey, everybody, welcome to Written and Watch, where we talk about a book and then we talk about a movie. Today, we're doing the book part of it, and this is actually the first one that we're doing. My guest today is Noah. He brought to me Perks of Being a Wallflower, which I have never read. It was in 1999 by Steven Chbosky, but I think I'm saying that Polish name right. I'm not great at them. So, Noah, will you introduce yourself and tell us why you were interested in Perks?
Yeah, so my name is Noah. I am 28 years old, and I am originally from the Chicagoland area, moved to the East Coast, the South Carolina area about 3 years ago. And yeah, Perks Being a Wallflower, there, I feel like if you're a book reader, there is always that book that comes to you at like the perfect time in your life, just like the right time. And Perks was very much that book for me. I read it when I was a sophomore in high school, and that was, that year wasn't necessarily like the most important year of my life, but I was definitely in a place where I felt very similar to Charlie. I've always been a wallflower. I've always been, especially when I was in high school, I was not like the popular kid. I didn't have a ton of friends. So I was very much looking for my place. I was very much looking for my Sam and Patrick. And so to be able to read this book and connect so much with Charlie in the fact that we are both people that are kind of constantly in our heads and kind of have to force ourselves to participate. That was definitely something that resonated with me.
So I can see how that would happen, because for me, I didn't read it in high school. It didn't come out until I'd been in college for a while. So it was kind of low on my radar. I think the first time I heard about it was when they made the movie, and I never saw the movie either. So the movie will be a first watch for me. But the kind of quick line plot is there's a guy, Charlie, and he's writing letters to somebody who we don't know who it is. So you can take it as read that he's writing them directly to you. But he's writing these letters that recount his first year in high school, right? So they start right before he starts, and then all the way through for his first year in high school. Mm-hmm. And during that span, it's very clear that he matures over the course of the book. He develops as an individual. He has a hard time making friends and being in a group. And so he eventually finds this kid, this brother and sister set, Sam and Patrick, who he makes a really close connection to. He's romantically interested in Sam for the duration of the book, and she's older and doesn't reciprocate. It's very much he's like 14 at the start of the book, and she's like 17. And so that's the path of the book. It's kind of a coming of age. I wouldn't say ugly duckling, because there's not like a swan transformation, but there's definitely a growth. And you watch Charlie grow and his kind of quirkiness become a strength that for the group that he's in and for him developing into a person. So that's kind of the tight line plot, where there's this will they or won't they, and it's his first year in high school trying to be a person in high school, right? Did I miss any kind of keynotes there?
I think that pretty much hits it. I think this is very much a story about becoming the person that you're going to be. So, of course, it's a coming of age novel. And I feel like so much of what this novel deals with is the idea that your past doesn't have to define you, and that the relationships that you make, the people that you're able to lean on kind of are the ones that can help you through, so that you're able to get to that other side of the tunnel, see the light at the end of the tunnel.
I think that's fair. And I should say here, there's spoilers all over in this. So you haven't read the book and you want to, go read it. If you just want to hear us talk about it, stick around. If you've seen the movie, you know the spoilers, so you should be good. But I do think that it's worth talking about Charlie as a construct, because when I first started reading the book, it's written in the letters thing, right? So it's this epistolary thing, like Dracula was written that way. There's a couple other books written that way, but in that way, I'll admit, in the first like 2 or 3 letters, I'm like, if the whole thing is like this, it's going to be rough, because it's very halting prose. It's very simple prose. The construct of the sentences is a little bit run on. It's deliberate. I didn't realize that until I got about halfway through. And I'm like, okay, I could feel the prose changing, but that initial couple of letters were very, and I think they kind of hit in contrast to the placement he is in classes. Like, he's in the advanced English class and he has a teacher who keeps giving him extra books and going, hey, you need to read more and write more. So here, read this and write back on it. And so that first thing kind of threw me off. What was your response to the style? Were you fine? Would just dove right in and it worked?
So in terms of the sentence structure and his Charlie, the way that he comes off, there is so much crying in the beginning of this novel that
it does.
That did really kind of irk me when I first read it. But on this reread, and I should say, like, I've read this book probably 3 or 4 times over the past 10 years, so it's a book that has really grown with me. But I noticed exactly what you just said, is that it seems like once he gets into the school year, and especially once he starts doing the extra work for his teacher, that you start to see the sentence structure kind of develop and not be as simple. You know, it still kind of maintains that simplicity throughout the entire novel, but you definitely see, even in the way he talks, that he is growing. And I think a great thing is that, you know, we're not getting these letters, like, he's not writing them every day. So you have them kind of spaced out, so the change doesn't feel as, like, it feels natural. It doesn't feel like it's coming out of nowhere. I would say I love the epistolary format for this book. Yeah, it's really strong here. Yeah, because the thing that really stands out to me is this is a story that by the time you open it, 20 years have passed. You know, even at the time it was published, about a decade had passed.
Yeah, because I was noticing that too, because it's his first letter is in 91, right? So 91, he's starting his year. It was published in 99. And it's really close to when I was actually in high school, which I found interesting, because I started my first year of high school in 92 and I graduated in 96. But that was interesting. And we'll talk about that in a minute, but there's some stuff in there. So go on about the timing that you were talking about.
Well, so what I was going to say about that is that the fact that by the time you've read the book, so much time has actually passed since the events have occurred. Yeah. That really sat with me, because there's such a stark contrast to being able to deal with things when you're a child and when you're able to deal with things as an adult. And I think where we leave off with Charlie, it's a really great thing that we see he gets better, but it always kind of sat with me that, you know, 20 years have passed since then. Like, it made the stakes feel so much more important, because it's like, you know, what has happened to these characters in these 20 years since?
Oh, are you talking about the rewrite letter?
Well, even before
you're just thinking in your mind.
Right. Even before I got to read that letter, that was always in the back of my mind, is that the fact that there's so much distance between you and the story, it kind of leaves this lingering feeling, this kind of unsettling feeling of whether or not these characters turned out okay, which I think is a testament to they feel so real throughout the story that even after it's over, you have that added sense of wondering how they turned out.
Yeah, I think one of the things too that stuck there and made that kind of hang around, that worry for the characters, kind of worry for Charlie too, is that the whole thing opens with him kind of writing the letter because his best friend has committed suicide. Like it was 6 months ago, like
Right.
pretty recent to when he starts school. And so he's starting his school year without his only real friend that didn't feel like he was weird and didn't make fun of him. They hung out. They were cool. And his suicide, I think, casts a shadow over the whole thing, because in this whole thing, I was waiting for his crying and his despair and all that stuff to turn into more of a like pathway to suicide. About halfway through, I'm like, I don't know if he's going to make it through the book. Right. And I had that fear kind of bubble up around the halfway point when stuff kind of falls apart, right after he's dating, not Sam, but the other young lady.
Mary Elizabeth.
Yeah. Mary Elizabeth. When that kind of falls apart, I'm like, oh, is this going to be, what kind of torture is this that he just lost his whole friend group, his whole support group? And is he strong enough now to pass through it?
Right. And I think the last letter that we get from him before the epilogue of the novel is supposed to imply that he has made some sort of attempt or is very close to making some sort of attempt.
Yeah, and I was really frustrated by that because I'm like, there's 5 pages left. It's either going to be okay or it's going to be over. Because if the last letter is an attempt and then you close it out, it's so gray. But because they don't close it out there, they give it a little bit more space and let people go off to college. And he's like, starts next year. That gives him the foundation to know he's still working. He's still working on it. He's still plugging away, and he should be okay. Which is nice because it's rough to start a book with suicide and close a book with suicide. So I'm really glad that it's a growth story, and the journey that he takes is really compelling and very interesting because it is an arc up that has several challenges in it. I wanted to call something out though, and that's that when I first started reading it with the style that it's in, especially because it's an epistolary, his name's Charlie and he's writing in this kind of rudimentary way. All I could think about at the beginning was Flowers for Algernon, which opens with a character named Charlie who's been told the diary. And he's kind of going, I have these friends. Here is what I do. I am a janitor. And it's super, super simple. Have you read that one?
I have not, but I definitely feel like this book is also kind of a love letter to other novels. There's obviously so many that are kind of name dropped here that I wouldn't be surprised if there was some influence.
It's a cultural bomb for sure. Like the whole thing is just so written to a time, to a soundtrack, to TV shows, just to a whole space that it exists in, which is it's really nice because it, having been in high school when I was, a lot of that stuff rings so true. I remember the groups that were listening to the Cure and the Smiths and the other groups that were listening to Nirvana and Metallica, and you had such clicky kind of constructs that it was just kind of stuck there. It was very 90s in that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you know, I was born in 95. So I started high school in the 2010s. So I had a lot of like the Lady Gaga and the Kesha and the lot more poppy music.
It was a very happy decade for music.
Very,
like
very happy.
There was so much joy in the music. There was very little angst at the top.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And things kind of always sounded samey. Like there's so much of the music just kind of blended together a little bit that I don't know that we had our really own specific identity. I mean, you can definitely, like you could write a novel and definitely be able to place it in that time, but I don't know like how much you could get separated and give it its own identity.
I think 90s too was the beginning of the time when everything started to become produced from every angle. And by that, I mean, you've got MTV and VH1 are both on the air at the time the novel's taking place. And because of that, all of the bands have to be put together not only for radio play, but for visual appeal and for stage presence too, right? So you have this machine that's starting to grow. And I heard a really interesting stat the other day when they were talking about the top 40 bands. And they went back to like the 60s and they're like, okay, what are the top 40 bands? And back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, even the early aughts and into the 10s, 90% of the bands on the top 40 were bands and not individual artists. The biggest ones that were individual artists, right, are Michael Jackson and Madonna. You've got Elvis way back, but Michael Jackson and Madonna are the ones everybody kind of knows. Everything else is bands. And what's happened is in the last like 5 years, it's almost all individual artists that occasionally come together and collaborate. Like Machine Gun Kelly is on like 8,000 tracks with bands and other people, but it's all Machine Gun Kelly with this person and not a band.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that it's kind of easier to control a singular artist than it is to control an entire band. And it's easier to like control an image, market a person as a brand and a certain thing than it is a full band nowadays.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting to watch that shift, and that's what I kept thinking about when I was reading about all the different artists and when he was making mixtapes and all those, and I was just like, oh, I remember doing that and having to wait for your song to come on the radio so you could record it. Because CDs back then were still like $20, and $20 back then was like $40 now. It's pricey.
Right. Yeah.
The other thing that struck me while I was reading this is that for me in high school at that time, it was the very early days of the internet, right? So it's Usenet forums, it's MUDs, it's AOL. And I was huge into that. And I feel like who he is as a person, I'm surprised that he was never in the library on a computer.
Yeah, right? That was very interesting to me too. Because, like you said, especially a person that is so inside of himself.
Yeah.
It's so much easier to go online and because you can be anybody, Certainly when I was growing up, I started really getting into the internet in like the late 2000s. So, and that's what I was doing, going to chat rooms and talking to people. So yeah, it is kind of interesting. And I do wonder, that probably is because it's something that is true to Stephen Chbosky's life, but I do wonder if that is kind of meant to show that Charlie himself just full stop has a hard time putting himself out there. Like but then again, he starts writing these letters to a person that he doesn't know. So it is, that is a very interesting kind of point to make. And
I think it's interesting to put out there because my girlfriend brought this up and I think that it's really interesting. And I want to ask you, do you think that if Charlie was 14 today, that he would be diagnosed on the spectrum of autism?
I have always thought that. I have always thought that reading this book. I don't want to give too many spoilers for the movies, and I won't, but they don't go that way with the movie. It's just kind of played straight. But in this book, especially reading the simplistic sentence structure that you were talking about, I immediately thought that because he also acts kind of younger than he actually is. And so I didn't know whether or not that was supposed to be Stephen Chbosky kind of trying to portray a survivor of sexual abuse is kind of emotionally stunted, or if he was going for the more autism spectrum disorder kind of thing.
So he's writing in 99, which is when it's still pretty much, you have the severe autism, which is a lot of the almost nonverbal sometimes, and then you have ADHD, and those are the kind of the two things that were in the air in 99. It wasn't until the early aughts that they started to kind of develop this spectrum idea and guidelines for testing and evaluating on the spectrum. So I think even when he was writing it, we still didn't have a clear understanding of autism, ADD, ADHD. And so I think he's writing it straight. And I think that he thinks that sometimes people are that way. And this is no slam on him. Right. This is just trying to read between the lines and see how he was thinking when he wrote it. But I think that for him, there's an element of some of the symptoms that look like autism could be caused by repressed abuse.
Yeah, I definitely think that, because it does feel like he puts in a lot of, almost like he went through a checklist of, this is how a survivor of sexual abuse acts, and he kind of made that the template for Charlie. So I definitely kind of agree with that. But I also feel like there was a tendency in the early 90s through the early 2000s to just kind of write these characters that, that you could say, oh, they're the socially awkward kind of kid, and kind of lump in any kind of qualities like that with autism. So I do think that was also a trend that was happening at the time. But yeah, I think it could have gone either way.
And I think that when you start parsing that and looking at how he arced it, I do think he did a very good job in kind of taking us into the mental state and how Charlie's processing this abuse that's happened to him, where he's really not for a long time.
Right.
And then it blows up for him. He is very, very, and I mean, that begs the question, or that sets up the question then, is like, was he always kind of a quiet kid, or was he a normal kid that became quiet? And that's a harder one to answer because of how early the abuse happens.
Yeah, and we don't really, it doesn't seem like we get too much information about what he was like as a kid. We only know him as this kid that was really close to his abuser. I do think that a lot of the Wallflower tendencies that Charlie has are because deep down he knows something is up, and he is making all of these observations about other people and the ways that we hurt each other to kind of process his trauma that he probably knows has happened, but isn't quite able to get there yet.
Well, and he has that, because it was interesting to read some of the stuff about, and the physical abuse between the sister and her boyfriend, and the way that the father dealt with that, the slap that he has when Charlie makes a remark about Aunt Helen, who was the abuser, but nobody knows that at this point, just Charlie, kind of. Like, when they started going into physical abuse, it really pulled me back to, like, the 80s and 90s were weird with that. Like, there were TV shows that would have a TV show of the week, and that TV show of the week was somebody on the show got physically abused, and then they dealt with it on the show. And it was the first time where, as a society, we were watching programming that went, hey, we're going to deal with this now. We're going to pull this out into the open and deal with it. And so you've got physical abuse that's being dragged out, sexual abuse is being dragged out, and we're in the shadow of the AIDS crisis that was happening through the 80s and into early 90s. And there's still this space where gay people are still villainized a bit in the late 80s, early 90s. And I think that the characters he has in here who are gay, who are victims of abuse, who are victims of physical abuse, kind of get to live in the shadow of that discussion instead of being fully in that discussion because of when he wrote it. Like I can feel the echoes of like Rent, the musical, like stuff that kind of glamorized and really put gay people more in the pop limelight. And so the gay characters in here are actually really well written, but they feel more mature than a high school gay kid in 91, 92. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I think that as far as like Patrick and Brad are concerned, that there's a lot looming from the AIDS crisis, and there's I thought it was interesting how open Patrick was about his sexuality for the time, and that was very interesting to kind of contrast with Brad, who of course is a more masculine gay person. He is fulfilling more of the role that is expected of someone who is in his status in high school.
And that's such an interesting piece too to sit there and read through, because Patrick's confidence in his sexuality, I don't remember seeing. And I may have been fully ignorant of this at the time too, but I'm trying to think through the kids that I knew who were gay in high school, and they were theater kids, they were band kids. They had this kind of openness, but also there was a current of fear, because I just remember the high school I went to, it wasn't, it was high school. So kids are awful.
Yeah.
So it was interesting to watch Patrick kind of move through that world with such confidence and comfort.
Yeah, I do wonder, and, I haven't read too much about what exactly the experience of, being a gay person in the midst of the AIDS crisis was like, but I do wonder if there was a bit of, I'm sure there was a bit of anger about, like, you're watching all of your friends die. You're watching all of these people die and be villainized. And if that through the 90s kind of made some gay people feel like, you know what, like if people don't care what's going on, then I'm just going to be me. I'm just going to do what I want to do. And it's kind of like a protest of what was happening.
Well, I'll call this out. So in the late 80s, Reagan's press secretary, there was a conservative journalist, I forget his name, but he was watching the AIDS crisis happen in San Francisco, and he said, there's this thing. At that point, they were calling it GRIDS, gay-related immune deficiency syndrome, right? So they're like, what is this? It's the gay disease. So they called it the gay disease, GRIDS. Right. And this reporter kept asking, because you've seen so many people die, and he kept asking in the news conferences or the daily news briefings with the press secretary, he'd say, does Reagan know about this? And is he going to do anything about it? And the press secretary would joke back and be, why, you worried you have it? And everybody laughs. He goes, I know I don't have it. And everybody laughs. So when you're watching your government discount that group of people and you're part of that group of people, that's got to be devastating. I mean, it's kind of like watching somebody talk about Haitian immigrants right now, right? It's just what's happening?
What are we doing?
What are we doing here? And so I think that is an interesting piece. And it bumped into it once too, where I thought for a minute, Charlie was going to Patrick to people that didn't know he was gay.
Right.
When he was like, it's the Christmas gifts. And one of the gifts he gets him is the Harvey Milk biography.
Harvey Milk. Yep.
And I thought he was going to give it to him like at the big party at the end. But then he goes, I bought him a book about Harvey Milk. And that's all that happens. It never gets brought up. But I really thought that was going to pop that bit. I was like, Is he about to out his friend?
Right. Yeah. And I feel too, I feel what is kind of hanging over the whole book is this idea that, people have this artifice. They have this mask that they have to kind of wear because of different societal expectations, and
Yep.
what happens as you're kind of feeling the weight of all of that. We definitely see that with Brad as he just gets to a worse and worse place. And then I think with Patrick, it's kind of a situation where he is comfortable with himself, but now he's kind of having to contend with these feelings of, this person that I love can't accept me for me. He can't accept himself. Like,
Yeah.
where does that leave me? And then of
Yeah.
course we see him sinking to a similar place.
Well, it's interesting too how they do the establishment of the denial through blackout inebriation. Like
Right.
the first couple of times that Patrick and Brad get together, Brad's pretending to be more wasted than he is. And it's pretty clear that he's using it as an out to say that he doesn't remember it. And it's an interesting construct for kind of letting him parse his denial of his self, which is challenging too, because if you look at it, Charlie's whole thing is denying a part of himself and that he's repressed and hasn't dealt with. And so to have Patrick and Sam be so comfortable, and then all the other people that he's interacting with have something that they're denying. His sister is hiding her relationship with the abuser. Brad's denying his sexuality. You really start getting into this thing where it's not just him carrying around an artifice. Everybody's carrying around some kind of artifice, which is very high school. It's very high school.
Oh, absolutely. And it's yeah. And it's, I think, a very difficult thing, especially at that age. Like, once you realize how screwed up the world is, you think as a kid, like, oh, when I'm an adult, everything's gonna make sense.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
these things that I'm feeling are gonna make, maybe they feel like the end of the world, and maybe you don't have the experience to know it, but you're like, I just can't wait to be past this.
Yeah.
But I think looking around, and even the adults that we see in the novel are not well equipped to handle the issues that these kids are dealing with. That there's a lot of like, okay, like, who's here to save us? Who is here to help guide us through this? Which is furthering
I'd like to
the
defend
pain.
at least his dad, because when his dad finds out about the daughter's abuse, he drives over,
He does something.
tells the parents, and leaves. Like, he doesn't, and he wants to beat the crap out of the kid.
Yeah.
He just goes over there and opens up that can of worms and departs. And the other one, Bill, the teacher in there, for the first third of the book, I was worried he was going to abuse Charlie.
Mhm.
Like, they set it up in a really, and this could, this could be the pollution of all media with somebody's going to be an abuser. There's always going to be that thing.
Right.
I don't know why I'm laughing when I say that. I just think it's a wash in like these turncoat characters. And so I was worried about Bill for a while. Like, is he giving him extra work and extra books and stuff so he'll come by his office hours and spend more time with them? But he turns out to be a lovely supporting person of Charlie and Charlie's writing and development. Which was nice. So I do think that those two characters are actually really good allies for Charlie and Charlie's sister in that way.
Yeah. And it's interesting that they're also like positive male influences. We never see Charlie's father, like, at least I don't think we really see him like tell him to man up and stop crying. And we see Bill be very compassionate, be very open about wanting to make sure that Charlie knows that he is a remarkable person, and because he's not sure that anyone has ever told him that. So
Well, I think that the dad does have that moment where he's crying. I think it's after they watch the tape of
when they watch
his son
the
playing
MASH
football.
finale.
Yeah, the football match. But he does have that moment where he gets emotional and he has that. So I think that he's actually a pretty well constructed 90s dad.
Right.
Like, because if you think about a dad in the 90s, he's probably late 30s, early 40s, because he's got a kid he's got to be early 40s because he's got one kid who's in college.
Right.
But that one kid who's in college, you put him at 40. So that means he was born like 1950s.
Right.
Like, that's a time when your parents just got back from the war and they don't talk to you.
Yep.
Like, it's a different thing. So for him to be in that kind of a space, it's a pretty strong, supportive character, both him and Bill. Yeah, to your point.
Yeah. And I think it's also a testament to this theme in the novel that it doesn't matter where you came from, you have a choice about how you're going to go through life, So I think the fact that we get a character like Bill, because on this reread, obviously I knew he was a good guy, but I'm rereading it and I'm like, wow, if I didn't know any better, like I would have had that same reaction as you. But I think the difference there is he's kind of a foil to show like, no, a person can be really caring and compassionate. And they don't have to be nefarious, but it's a choice. It's a choice to how you're going to treat other people.
Yeah, and to your point about like figuring it out and realizing that your parents don't have all the answers in that kind of space, I do think that high school is one of those times where you start to lose a hold of the just world hypothesis. And because you're expecting the world to be balanced and there to be kind of a karmic cycle, you go, well, crap, this is so awful right now. So it either has to get better or it's the whole thing is rigged. The whole thing is just junk. And I think that they did a good job in kind of portraying that for some of the characters as they go through it. Charlie most specifically, then also Brad and Mary Elizabeth and Charlie's sister. What's Charlie's sister's name? I can't remember.
Oh, Candace.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't remember if she was named in the book, but yeah, that's her.
Oh, okay. Then that's why I can remember it.
I literally don't remember if he says his brother or his sister's name, but because I've seen the movie, I know.
Oh, okay. Fair. The other one that I was watching this too that was an interesting kind of take for his character was the drug use. Like getting to the point where he was doing a lot of weed and then he has a bad LSD trip at one point to where he falls asleep in the snow and has to go to the hospital. But he gets to a point where he's just dealing with everything by smoking a lot of weed. And that was an interesting just kind of side piece. I kind of appreciated that it wasn't in the whole book because it was just like a phase. Like it was literally a phase where he smokes weed for like a couple of months when stuff is really bad. And then he kind of goes, this is messing it with stuff. And I think Sam talks to him, but then he goes, okay. And kind of stops smoking as much weed and normalizes his behaviors. So I thought the drug use was an interesting kind of just brush against it without making it the whole book or the whole story.
Yeah, I think it would have been very easy to go with that. Like you said it earlier, like it would have been very easy for them to go the route of, oh, his best friend killed himself, so we're going to watch him spiral for the next 200 pages.
A very Darren Aronofsky kind of movie then. It'd be just right up there with Requiem for a Dream or The Wrestler, and he just black swanning into oblivion.
Yeah, but I do think that is, like you said, very, very interesting that he is able to kind of recognize what's happening and stop it before it gets worse.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just kind of a side piece. Like this is a hell of a first year for this kid, He's between the roller coasters with his friends, the roller coaster with his family, the pieces with drugs, the writing stuff, the needing to get straight A's. Like there's all these things that are happening and confounding his ability to kind of process the core problem he has which is repressed memories of abuse and dealing with that. Like he takes his sister and drives her to get an abortion shortly after he gets his license. It's like there's so much stuff in this first year for this kid. It could almost have been 2 years and I wouldn't have blinked that it took that long, like, to tell all these stories. But
yeah, absolutely. And that could be an issue of Stephen Chbosky just thinking of every teen issue that could come up and throwing them all in there. But I think what I love about this book is that, there all of these small moments. There's nothing besides the revelation at the end. There's nothing that stands out as more important than anything else. There doesn't seem to be like super clear cut story beats that it's trying to hit, so you can just kind of take everything as it is. And I feel like that makes the story so much more
this
rich.
makes me kind of excited for the movie too, right? So as much as it does that for the story, it's very much a novel, and it has these kind of disconnected pieces that are all just things that are happening, but because of them, relationships change, and that's what you're watching, is this processing of relationship change too.
Yeah, absolutely. Because especially like when we get the relationship with Charlie and his sister, and at the beginning it's very combative, sibling relationships are. She's more popular than him, so she doesn't want to ruin her cred. But then we have this very human moment between the two of them where she needs him and he is able to show up for her. But it's not betraying the fact that, like, okay, just because these pivotal things happen and just because the relationships change, they're not like, it's not like they're then spending late nights like talking to each other and bearing their feelings. Like, they're still griping at each other. They're still doing things that siblings do, but
very
you
family
get to
moment,
see
though.
the way the small moments change them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's great. The other piece that came in there, so there's that bit, and then there's the Sam's boyfriend was cheating on her like most of the time they were together, and that's kind of derails and finally puts it in a spot where Sam and Charlie have the moment. And I think it's really a nice choice for Stephen Chbosky to put it in that place and say the revelation and the awareness is going to happen here with the thing he wants so bad and now he can't have, which is a relationship with Sam. Because as soon as she starts to take his pants off, all of his stuff comes flooding back and he just shuts down. Like, he's almost catatonically despondent. And that choice and that reveal, it was really surprising to me because I didn't expect. There's some clues to it, and on a reread, I'm sure they're more obvious. But I didn't know it was going to go. Charlie was sexually abused. That was a surprise. Like 5 pages from the end, they don't take a lot of time to help him and kind of reconstruct that. It's pretty quick.
Yeah. I think that
I'm looking. I want to see how close to the end it is because it was really, really close.
Yeah.
Here it is. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I didn't know. Just calm down. Take breaths. Okay. So page 202.
Yep.
He's catatonic. And then.
Yeah,
it's 208.
Okay, 208.
I kind of figured out that everything I dreamt about my Aunt Helen was true. And I realized that it happened every Saturday when we watched television. So this is the abandonment piece that I think you and I were both at. I hope you have a very nice life because I really think you deserve it. I really do. I hope you do too. Okay, then goodbye. It's like, what? Wait, what? Right. So it almost feels like there could be a whole second set of letters that's him processing that stuff. I don't know if it'd be as interesting as this one is, because it'd really just be about his work on that issue. But I'm surprised it comes so late in the text.
Yeah, I think I think it's because he, Charlie is a person that we get very much inside his head, and we see him ruminating on things. But I think it's the fact that for a lot of the book, he's very passive, despite the fact that we know what it is that he thinks about things. He never expresses those things or really allows the things that he thinks to change his behavior, in my opinion. So I think this moment with Sam, when he's finally able to be vulnerable with her, that's the first point where it's like, oh, okay, like there's something that I actually have to deal with now. Even his feelings for Sam, that is something that someone is actually forcing him to confront these feelings that he has carried with him the entire book. And so I think that is something that once he's able to do that, then that kind of opens up the floodgates.
Well, even his relationship with Mary Elizabeth, he's too scared to not do it. He's too scared of losing people in his life to not have that relationship, even though he doesn't really want that relationship.
Right. And I think what's interesting is, so kind of going back to the talk of whether or not Charlie is on the autism spectrum, because with a lot of people on the autism spectrum, it's not that they don't have a sense of right and wrong. It's that they don't always know the best way to kind of deal with things. And so you think that, oh, Charlie doesn't know what it is that he's doing when he kisses Sam. He knows exactly what it is that...
You think so?
I think
Do you think
does.
that he knows the fallout that's going to come for his relationship?
Maybe not the fallout, but I do think he knows this will at least fix one of my problems. I don't think he has the social awareness to know everything that is
fair
gonna come out.
Fair. I feel almost like it's an inability to socially lie. Like that's one of the masks that he doesn't have. And so when he's dared to do a specific thing, okay, I have to do the thing, which feels very on the spectrum to me, is and why is everybody mad? I did the thing I was supposed to do kind of space, which is,
right.
That's an interesting one, right?
I was a good boyfriend. I did the things that were expected of me.
I listened to her.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's a fair point, and that probably goes more in your direction. So I can see that.
Yeah, it's interesting. The piece that popped in there too that I was surprised was a part of it was the Rocky Horror Picture Show stuff.
Yeah.
Have you ever been to the Rocky Midnight Show?
So I have never been, because when I've read what they do to the virgins, the Rocky Horror virgins, I was like, I do not want that attention on me. But I have seen Rocky Horror.
So I went to a bunch of them. There was a group in El Cajon, down in San Diego, called Crazed Imaginations. They did midnight shows every Friday. I knew a bunch of the cast members. I went a lot. And I thought it was really interesting to pick such a piece of outside kind of counterculture, even in 99. Even now, it's not as massively huge. But I think that for sure, the author had to have gone to these shows. He had to have gone, and that's why he incorporates it. Because it was such a niche thing, even when I was in high school. There's such a small number of people that knew about it, went to it. And there was one theater, Friday at midnight, that did it. And it pulled from all over the county. So out of, 1.5 million people, you'd get 150 in a theater to go see it. And the people were in it. And so it's such a small thing. And I thought it was fascinating that it was in there. And it was a really interesting piece for Patrick expressing his sexuality and confidence that he constantly plays Frankenfurter.
Right. And yeah, the thing is that Rocky Horror itself is a very sex positive show that it's interesting that, yeah, it's very counterculture. It's very much for the misfits. And I think that added layer of, having this sex positive kind of experience is kind of something interesting. I don't want to go so far as to say like, that's why Charlie like enjoys the experience. Like he's being opened up to something that is more sex positive.
Well, I think it goes back to what you were talking about earlier about the masks and the performances and what we do. Because he even talks about the point when he's playing Rocky and there's the touch me song and he and Sam are pretending to touch each other and he's able to do it because it's performative.
Right.
And so he can separate that out from the underlying emotion. So it goes right back to what you were talking about earlier on in the presentation and the masks.
Right. And
kind of the code switching stuff too, where it's like, this is different Charlie.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like there's a Kurt Vonnegut short story where this woman and this guy, the only way that they're able to talk to each other is if they're able to play out like different plays or different stories. I forget what it's called. But even the idea that like it's a shadow cast, they're not doing even their own musical version of it. They are literally just shadow casting what is on the screen is something that's very interesting.
Interesting. I also, the thing that took me really back too was the calling to do stuff throughout this whole thing where there's really no other way than calling the house and hoping somebody's there. Yep. And it's a really nice thing for structure that people aren't available sometimes. Like it's a lot easier to make people be here or not be here because you can't find them. There's no permanent tracker attached to everybody's hip. And so the period of time where Patrick keeps coming by and picking up Charlie and they go and get truck stop wasted on upper pills is hilarious to me and rings super true of the 90s for how kids would go screw around. I remember going ice blocking with my cousins and we'd go get blocks of ice, sneak onto the golf course at night and ride them down. I remember going and getting ripped on Boone's Farm Strawberry Hill with a senior when I was a freshman. It was just like you ended up hanging out with the people that were nearby because you can't get a hold of anybody else.
Right. Yeah.
Which I don't know if that's true anymore. Like you can always bounce out and go find your friends.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something that has kind of been lost there because, you can just...
Did you have a cell phone like your whole high school career?
Yes. So by the time that I was in high school, I had a phone. So, you have this constant access to everyone. Yeah, I feel like people... it's probably different when you're in high school because you're more willing to do spontaneous things.
True.
You're not beholden to like, I can't do that. I've got this to do and this to do. So,
yeah,
but yeah,
they can't find me. They can't make me do it.
Right. Exactly. You used to have,
and it's a great excuse. Sorry, I was out. I was doing stuff and I didn't know you needed me.
Exactly. That is the kind of the thing you used to be able to do, just be out all day and then check your answering machine, or, people calling you at restaurants. That's the thing that I always see.
Yeah.
But
Call for Mr. Hebler. Call for Mr. Hebler. Right. Oh, I'm Mr. Hebler. And they bring the phone over next to the dinner table. And it's like, hello. Must be an important businessman over there.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I remember in the Muppet movie, they do call for Mr. the Frog, call for Mr. the Frog and bring him the phone. Hello. This is really good. So I think it's a very readable book. It's a very approachable novel. It's actually really nice. It's a light read. It's only a couple of hundred pages, about 200 pages in the actual published version. So, it's a 3-day trip read. Like if you're reading by the beach all day, you can hit it there. So in that though, and before we both go off and watch the movie and then come back and talk to you guys about it, Noah, do you have final thoughts or things that you would advise people to think about while they're reading it, or anything else you want to talk about in the text itself?
I just feel like this is a very interesting book to read in terms of the idea that hope is available to all people at all times, and that I think in the process of reading this book, it kind of makes you think about the role that you're playing in your own life and whether or not you are actively putting in the work to kind of deal with things so that you aren't putting up that mask and are able to, lean on people to kind of help you through your stuff. And I just think that this is a very important book for anyone that is just kind of dealing with, as we talked about, growing up and realizing that the world is so much bigger than the high school walls, than the rules that have been put upon you for the first 15 years of your life. And I hope anyone that is reading this book is able to kind of realize that even as your world might get bigger and that might be scary, there is help. There are people that will be there for you, and you don't have to worry about whether or not there's light at the end of the tunnel, because there is.
Yeah, I think that's very well put. This book kind of is like it's like a little therapy workbook. Like as you're going through it, just read along and follow the characters. And I think it's a very solid piece of text to kind of parse that stuff, especially if you're holding on to stuff that you don't know you're holding on to. I took a minute and read through, like, I think you did too, like the subreddit for this. Yeah. And most of the people in there talking about it, they reread it like you do. They reread it and it's just, okay, I needed that. I needed to reread it, have a cry at some parts of it, or just kind of process it. And it's like a reset for some people, which is really interesting. So warning, if you read this book once, you may need to read it forever. You could be doomed to always have a copy of Perks of the Wallflower. In saying that, I realized one other thing is that there's a whole bunch of books that are referenced in it. And those books that are referenced in it are very much of the time, because some of them have changed in their public perception. And so while that happened to some of them, and I'll call out like The Fountainhead is in there, and Ayn Rand's interaction with culture has greatly changed since 99. The other one is not To Kill a Mockingbird. It's what's the one with Holden Caulfield?
Oh, Catcher in the Rye.
Catcher in the Rye. Thank you. And Catcher in the Rye has also had, it's gotten this strange space with the bizarre adult manosphere where they think Holden Caulfield is weak because he is kind of processing stuff. So saying that, I say that to say that this particular book has a really good set of processing. It has some really good male role models. It has some really good kind of ways to deal with problems that aren't going out and fighting over it. And I think that's a really interesting space for a book from the late 90s about the early 90s to kind of be in a position of. So it was a very good book. It was very readable. I appreciate you bringing it to me. And I'm really curious to see what they do with the movie, because it'll be my first watch. And it's also, and this is, I'm spreading this too soon, but I remember seeing the cast, and it's got Hermione Granger in it. Excuse me, Emma Watson.
Yeah.
And Ezra Miller as, I think they're Sam and Patrick, right?
Yep. Yep.
Okay, so and that's interesting with what their careers have done. So that's all going to be fascinating and fun. So you guys will want to tune in the next episode to listen to that. Before we go, Noah, do you want to tell the people where they can find you if they want to follow along or see what you're doing and up to?
Yeah, so you can follow me on Twitter at Noah Mussay. That is Mussay. I spend a lot of time talking about the CBS reality shows Big Brother and Survivor. Survivor just started, so I will be definitely putting my thoughts out there every week. Big Brother's got about a month left, and it's been a really great season, so I'll be continuing to share my thoughts out there. And then if you are so inclined to head over to my YouTube channel, The Entertainment Zone 679, where I primarily talk about Doctor Who and am hoping to get into classic Doctor Who. So you can look out for me there.
How far back are you going on Doctor Who? So when you say classic Doctor Who, are you going all the way back to the beginning?
Oh, yeah. So
who's your modern Doctor?
So this is going to be... So I started just with the first series. So I started with Christopher Eccleston. I think he's really underrated. I'm going to give the boring answer, though, and go with David Tennant because obviously there was more to work with there. And I have so much fun whenever he's on screen. Like, even the worst episode is made better because I enjoy watching him on screen. I have watched like the first 9 seasons of classic Doctor Who, with the caveat that a lot of the first and second Doctor's stories are missing.
That's true. So they taped over him, right?
Yeah, they did. So there's most of the second Doctor is gone, and there's still quite a bit of the first Doctor. So if I cover it on my YouTube channel, though, I'm going to start with the third Doctor because that is, well, one, I don't want to have to watch all of the first and second Doctor again, but the third Doctor is a really good jumping on point for people. So I am hoping to do that.
That's great. For Survivor, do you think Jeff Probst has got it nicer?
Do I think he's got it nicer?
He's gotten nicer. It feels like he used to be really mean to everybody. He's like, come on, you could get better than that. And when they're running in the mud. And now he's like, yeah, you're still pulling through. Like, I feel like he's gotten nicer.
We've gotten a little bit of sassy Jeff the last couple of seasons. I watched the premiere last night, and he was going in on some players during that immunity challenge. But yeah, I do think he's trying to make the show something that's a little more different than it started out with. Still good, just still good, different.
Still good. What, 46, 47?
We're at 47.
In? Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah, so and I just started watching within the last 7 seasons. So there's I used to watch as a kid and then started with season 39. So but yeah, I really enjoy it.
All right, so there we go. Doctor Who, Big Brother, and The Survivor. Notes all from Noah. You can go find him there. We'll put the links to that in the show notes. We'll also put it underneath the YouTube. Like and subscribe. Really appreciate you guys coming around and listening to talk about a book that was written. We'll see you next week.